Welcome to this module, the first core module of this course. And in this module, we will dive into version management with Git. Specifically, we'll dive into the basics. This means all we need to know to use Git in our own projects already. For this, we'll dive into three core areas in the end. The first one, of course, is some theory, so we'll understand how Git works from a practical perspective, but also from a theoretical perspective. This means we'll have a look under the hood of Git and see how it performs all these version management tasks as efficient as it is. Besides that, we'll of course also have a look at how we can install Git on our machine, and we'll also implement our development environment. This means we'll set up our computer in a way that we can use Git easily and also practically in any kind of project, here specifically tailored towards web development projects though. And the third core area of this module is, of course, the Git basics part itself. We'll dive into a lot of core concepts behind Git, one of these being the very common terms of repositories, branches, and commits. Of course, we are not limited to these keywords here. There's a lot more to discover in this module. With that, let's not waste any more time and let's dive right into Git, specifically into the Git theory, so Git under the hood. Although Git is an amazing version management tool, version management is not a completely simple task, to be honest. Therefore, also learning how to use Git can be a bit cumbersome from time to time, and to make this journey as easy as possible for you, we'll now first have a look at how Git works under the hood in a simplified way though. This knowledge is very important though, because without that theoretical background, some commands being used throughout this module will not be as easy to understand as they are after these lectures. Now, let's get started with a very simple example. As I said, this course focuses on Git from a web development perspective, and therefore we could say that we want to create a web shop. Therefore, we might have a project folder also named web shop, and in this folder we can have all our files required to create this website. In a very simple form, this could be an index.html file, a style CSS file, and a folder containing some images. Now, if you create this project on your computer, this has nothing to do with Git, right? It's just a plain folder in the end containing all these different files without any version management enhancements. Now with Git, we are able to turn this folder containing all these different project files into a so-called working directory. The working directory is something we'll of course also explore in a lot more detail. Working directory here simply means all files, all project files which are part of this folder and which are supposed to be managed by Git. So we somehow have to find a way to turn this plain folder into this working directory, and let's assume we did this by using Git. And now we want to save this first version of our project, meaning these two files and the folder should be stored as a first draft of our website code, for example. In Git, we can do this by creating so-called commits. You can think about the commit basically as a snapshot in the end. So the first commit we create right here could be snapshot 1. What is this snapshot all about though? Well, this first snapshot simply contains all files, all folders we have in this initial project folder in our working directory. And very important, the terms working directory and commit are already part of the Git world. So these concepts only apply with Git managing our project folder. Thinking about this web development example though, you typically know that things don't stay as they are. Projects evolve, bugs are fixed, new features are added, and with the help of version management tools, we are able to keep track of these changes. So we stored the initial stage, and now let's say you changed some parts of the styles CSS file, and you also want to store these changes without losing your initial project state. This state is stored in the first commit as the first snapshot. By creating a second commit, here named snapshot 2, you could now add the changes made in this style CSS file. And very important, Git does not store two style CSS files here. It only checks what the initial state of the CSS file in the first commit was and which changes were applied to this file now. That's all that is stored. So using Git is all about tracking changes, not about storing files again and again. Because this would of course occupy lots of memory, lots of space on your hard disk drive, and would be highly inefficient. Continuing with this logic, we could also say that we added another file to this project here as another commit, snapshot3, and this could be a script.js file, a JavaScript file being added to this project. So this is the first core logic behind Git. We turn a simple project folder into a working directory, which means the files which are part of this folder are managed by Git. And we are then able to create different commits, different snapshots to track all changes made throughout the different stages our project goes through. The question now is, how does Git store these different changes though? Because you know that the working directory is just a project folder, the commits are different snapshots, but Git has to organize these different commits somewhere, or has to organize the whole project saving logic somewhere. Well, this brings us to the third core term in the Git world, and this is the term of the so-called branches. By default, Git stores all commits you make in the so-called master, or alternatively also referred to as main branch. We'll use the term master branch throughout this course though. So this branch, this master branch here, contains all changes made throughout our project. Branches are something we'll dive deeper a bit later in the course though. Because as I said, by default you have this master branch, so this main folder, so to say. It's not a real folder, but you can imagine this as a folder which stores all the different commits. Nevertheless, there is a bit more to understand when it comes to the working directory and these commits. Therefore, let's explore this in a bit more detail as a next step. To understand what happens under the hood when creating such a commit, we again have to have a look at our working directory. So the project folder managed by Git, containing all our project files. Here again with the assumption that we made some changes to the style CSS file, and these changes should now be tracked as part of a new commit. Now, whenever we turn a normal project folder into a working directory, so into a folder managed by Git, we automatically create another hidden folder. The .git folder, the so-called Git repository. The working directory is the part with the actual project files. The repository is the area where all the magic happens, all the version management magic, which makes Git such an efficient version management tool. To be able to perform these version management actions, the repository contains two different areas. The first area is the staging area, which is basically an index file. The second area is the objects folder, which contains the different commits, the different snapshots. Why do we have these two areas here? if we again think about the style CSS file, we want to create a commit which tracks the changes made to this file. So we can tell Git, and we'll see in this course how this works, that the new commit should contain all changes made to this style CSS file. As part of this commit creation, we first add the changes made to the style CSS file to this staging area. You can think about the staging area as a draft area, so to say. So as an area where files or changes made to specific files are stored to tell Git, hey, these changes made to this file should be part of the next commit. For a single file only, this doesn't make too much sense at first sight. But if you think about the logic that you first change your style CSS file and then you say, hey, I also want to add a new image to the page, and this change should also be added to the next commit, well, then you would also add this new image, so this next change, to the staging area. So that's where this logic is coming from. You first add the changes or the files containing changes to the staging area, and once all your changes are added, which should be part of this next commit, then you create this commit, you commit your changes, and with that, in our case, the style CSS file changes are tracked in the next commit, in the next snapshot. So it's important to understand this difference between this working directory and this repository, because later, when we dive into GitHub, the term repository will be mentioned quite often, so be aware of this differentiation. Although I mentioned it already throughout the course, I want to emphasize this once again. Git means tracking changes, not storing files again and again. Of course, Git has to store the initial files in the initial commit. So again, in our example, if we create the first commit, Git will store the index.html file, the style CSS file, and the images inside our image folder. But afterwards, here, with any changes made in the style CSS file, Git will not again store the entire style CSS file. It will just compare the previous commit with the new commit we want to make, and then only track these changes. Because otherwise we would store files again and again and again, and this would just bloat our entire project, and also, as mentioned before, this would be highly inefficient. However, at this point in time, we learned a lot about some core Git terms already. We learned about the working directory, we learned about commits, we saw the repository in here, and in the last lecture, we also mentioned the branches. These kind of folders where the commits are stored, I previously mentioned. Before finally diving into the project, it's time to also understand the branches in a bit more detail.